Well, here we are again. Peaceful background, but an interesting topic I'd like to look at, the topic of change. Now, although Australians like to think of themselves as rebels, they're really conformists. I think maybe it comes from our convict heritage, but most Australians, even if they find themselves in difficult situations, even if they have been exploited, even if they're marginalised and ignored, even if the rich get richer and Parliament manipulates the electoral system in order to ensure that one of the major political parties continues to be elected and re-elected, most Australians, let's be realistic, shrug their shoulders and say, well, so what? To a significant degree, this attitude is a product of success. Not economic success, but success in transforming the state from an instrument of oppression to an instrument which provides services to the population. And all the things we take for granted today, whether it's a public health system, public education system, whether it's public infrastructure, or it's the pharmaceutical benefits scheme, or Medicare, or the social security system, which looks after about 33% of Australians. Now, these didn't appear overnight. They didn't appear because those who make decisions felt it was a good thing to be done. They appeared after decades of struggle. And the fact that we have a safety net, the social security system, with ever widening holes in it, the fact that it's becoming more and more difficult to access the public health system, especially during the COVID-19 crisis, the fact there never seems to be enough money for public education, but tons of taxpayers' money for private education, and the continuing privatisation of public services and infrastructure has done something in this country which nobody else has been able to do. I think we're the best in the world as far as this is concerned. In the 70s, at the height of the trade union struggles, if an investor invested money in a particular project and made a profit, 1/3 of that profit would go into the investor's pockets, and 2/3 of that profit would go into the pockets of the workers who created that profit. Put the clock forward 4 decades, 40 years, and we've seen those figures turned on its head. If an investor invests $1 in a project, and that project makes a profit, 1/3 of that profit will go into the pockets of the workers who created that profit, and 2/3 will go into the pocket of the investors. We've seen a transformation in this society where working people on social security benefits are basically considered to be losers. That's right, losers. And it's those people who act in an ethical, moral way are the losers in 21st century Australia. The people who receive the recognition, whose bank accounts continue to grow exponentially despite COVID-19, are the winners. And that has happened because of structural legislative reforms which have gone through Parliament, which has put the future of the investor as the driver of economic recovery. The public sector has moved away from providing essential services through privatisation. So the private sector competes, has no real competition. To give you an example, in 1911, that's right, over a century ago, the Commonwealth Bank was formed by the government of the day in order to assist ordinary people to acquire loans at reasonable interest rates. It was almost impossible to acquire a loan before the establishment of the Commonwealth Bank. Now, the Commonwealth Bank, until it was privatised in the mid-1980s, acted as competition in a mixed economy. And that competition meant that the private banks were not able to gouge their customers and rip off their workers. With the privatisation of the Commonwealth Bank, what we've seen is that competition disappear, the banking sector breaking up into 4 or 5 large corporations, and those corporations continue to make ever-increasing profits for their major shareholders. And if you look at every field of human endeavour in Australia, every field is dominated by 2 or 3 large corporations, and everybody else picks up the crumbs, whether it's food, whether it's clothing, whether it's meat, whether it's medical services, and the list goes on and on. So what we've seen during the deregulation, privatisation, globalisation and corporatisation revolution is the rise and rise and rise of corporations and the rise and rise of the investor through legislation which has gone through Parliament, which puts their interests before the interests of those people our parliamentary representatives represent. Because in Australia, to be elected into government, there is a major issue. And that issue is that the media, both the legacy media and social media, is dominated by a handful of corporations who every time put their support and their extensive support behind political parties which pursue legislative aims which put their profits before the welfare of the community. It's the same with natural resources. We've seen the creation of billionaires exploiting this country's natural resources, while this country's First Nations people, especially in rural and regional areas, in many cases live a lifestyle which is similar to a third world situation. And this is not something that just appeared overnight, it's something that has occurred for generations. So what we've seen through privatisation is basically the private sector being given presence, whether it's our resources, whether it's money to the private education sector, whether it's money to the health insurance industry, whether it's money to private corporations, some religious base, to provide services to the community which should be provided by the public service, whether it's the partial privatisation of some very important institutions which continue to exist that have not been privatised, like Centrelink. Let's not forget that the Commonwealth Employment Office was government run, and it helped people who are unemployed to obtain employment. What we saw 20 years ago was the privatisation of the Commonwealth Employment Office, and that has led to 2 or 3 large corporations dominating the so-called unemployment benefits and the job market. At the same time, we saw the same thing with public education. We are seeing more and more aspects of public education being privatised. The same with the public health system. You go in a public hospital anywhere around this country and more than likely the pathology service is provided by a private company, cleaning is provided by a private company, ward staff are provided by a private company, and the list goes on. And these so-called public-private partnerships, it always seems that the private sector does the best out of it. For example, currently there is government legislation at foot which is going to privatise the organisations which are now publicly owned, which are responsible to the Commonwealth Government, which determine who accesses nursing home beds. We've seen this with the disability support pension, and we saw a failed attempt with the National Disability Insurance Scheme to move that scheme as far as assessment of people was concerned, whether they're eligible or not for the National Disability Insurance Scheme, move into the hands of the private sector. So today, although we have a National Disability Insurance Scheme which will cost anywhere between $15 to $17 billion a year to provide services to about 450,000 Australians who've got severe disabilities, and this is something that I work for over 40 years because I'm involved in the disability field. But what we've seen today is the domination of that field by private corporations who are making hay by providing so-called services which could be provided at a much lesser cost through a public sector. So the public sector has basically become in this country a conduit by which money flows from the federal and state treasuries into the hands of the private sector. Not individuals in the majority of cases, but corporations which dominate that particular field of human endeavour. For example, early childhood development, childcare, has been privatised and community-based centres have been starved of funds, and now we have 3 or 4 large corporations which dominate the childcare industry. Look, I could go on ad infinitum about the damage caused by privatisation and globalisation and corporatisation and deregulation. But unfortunately in 2021, these types of ideas are not fashionable. And although people feel pressures because of the safety net which was created through struggle, through access to public services which most people around the world would only dream about, we now find ourselves in a situation where we have created a depoliticised society. People are more interested in the grand final of their favourite football code and favourite football team. Are they more interested in what's on TikTok or YouTube, which obviously this not my type of YouTube presentations, but those that have cats in them, I understand. And fighting battles about nothing in particular as far as vaccination is concerned. So the list goes on and on. So we are at a critical juncture. So if we want change in this society where there are options available, we need to access movements and political parties that are demanding change. Not change based in dividing Australians based on their religious beliefs, their language, their culture, but fundamental change which delivers real services to the community and reverses that equation. For far too long we have hung around and Australians have been happy to be cheated of their birthright. That's right, cheated, shrug your shoulders. They shrug their shoulders and they move on. Obviously, not everybody is in that camp. But there is a shrinking number of people who now belong to political parties. And when we look at the government's so-called Registered Political Parties Integrity Bill, although there are all these things happening which reinforce the power of the government of the day, the government has been forced to act because an increasing number of Australians are voting informal, not voting, but more importantly, as far as they are concerned, because they can just dismiss the informal votes and those who don't participate in the electoral process, and they've done that successfully over the decades. But more importantly, there are more and more people voting for political parties, smaller political parties. Many of these political parties are divisive parties, and they gather their support by splitting Australians. They don't look at the economic consequences. They don't look at the economic situation we find ourselves in. They don't ask questions about wealth and increasing inequality in this country, and the fact they don't ask questions about why do nearly 1 million children living in poverty in this resource-rich country. Now, public interest before corporate interest was formed in late 2015 with the express aim of bringing questions regarding deregulation, privatisation, corporatisation and globalisation to the attention of people. We are not just a political party, we are also part of a wider social movement. But if you want change, we need to utilise every single opportunity available to us. Whether we stay outside the tent and get involved in direct action or workplace action, or whether we move into the tent and get involved in electoral politics, is not relevant. What is relevant is the fact that we need to be able to explain to people what is happening. Elections is about the only time that Australians think regarding political change, think about political change. Most times people just get on with their lives and think of our parliamentary representatives as buffoons or clowns who make decisions on our behalf. Now, the new bill that is going through Parliament currently will mean that only political parties with over 1,500 members will be able to apply for registration at the federal level. But fortunately, at the state level, there are different equations. In Victoria currently, you need 500 members to register as a state-based party, and in different states, you need different membership numbers to register. So what we're recommending, public interest before corporate interest, is that if you are interested in this particular party or another political party that's going to be deregistered because it hasn't got enough membership, that you aim for state registration and then use that state registration as a platform to expand your influence at the federal level. Currently, public interest before corporate interest has 422 members on the Victorian state electoral roll. We need about 550 members to apply for registration as a state-based party in Victoria. So if you're watching this YouTube and you're interested in change, interested in radical change, you're sick and tired of what's happening in this country, you're sick and tired of being treated as a fool by unethical, immoral people who are there basically to augment the fortunes of those who already exploit the community, then I recommend you join public interest before corporate interest. The next Victorian state election will be in late November 2022. That gives us plenty of time to register the federal political party. We need about another 120 members in order to apply for registration. If we are registered as a state-based political party in Victoria before the 2022 election, We can then stand in that election in the Legislative Council, and there's always a good chance that one or two candidates could be elected into the Legislative Council. If that occurs, or even if it doesn't occur and we've got a good turnout on our behalf, we then will be in a position to broaden the appeal of public interests before corporate interests to a wider audience and register as a federal political party. At the same time, we'll continue to be involved in protest action, community boycotts, trade union activity, workplace activity, because ultimately what the COVID-19 pandemic has done, it has put the issues which were at the forefront of people's minds 2 years ago on the back burner. Those issues have not gone away. In many circumstances, those issues have got worse. So the ball's in your court. Using a tennis analogy, you can do a number of things. You can just close your eyes and watch it drift past, dreaming about your football team winning the big one, the grand final. You can consume TikTok and all those other social media outlets till the cows come home. You can become the greatest click activist since the formation of the World Wide Web, or you can join public interest before corporate interests. Whether we can use parliamentary campaigns as a mechanism of change ultimately depends on the amount of support we can obtain from you.